Hello and welcome to Train Signal. This is video number 4, Using Linux Part 1. This is part of Fast Track CBT Video, Linux Networking and Administration. This video is going to be a little bit different from some of the other videos because primarily what we'll be doing is giving you a hands-on tour of how Linux operates and all the little quirks and eccentricities, applications, navigating the directory structure, a few of the basic command line options, and just learning really to get around Linux. So let's take a look at our table of contents. So in this tour of Linux, we'll be covering common Linux tasks such as logging in, logging out, running the task manager, panels, and screens. We'll talk about common GUI applications like calculator, etc. I'm going to go through all the different GUI applications that come installed with Fedora Linux. We're going to take a look at the command line shell versus the GUI interface. We'll start a shell, we'll learn about the types of shells, launching programs, shell shortcuts, the directory structure, directory navigation using change directory and ls, talk briefly about wildcards, learn how to copy, move, rename, and delete files. We'll talk about File Explorer in the GUI interface versus the CLI. And then we'll learn how to change the resolutions and colors of our monitor and our screen. So with that, let's get started with the demonstration. I'm going to go down here to my Fedora Linux machine, and we're at the login prompt. So I want to explore, before we log in, all these different options we have down here. So the first one is language. If I click on language, it shows me all the different language that Linux supports. It's amazing to me, all the different languages. Some of them I'm not afraid to admit that I've never heard of. For instance, Catalan, and maybe I shouldn't even try to pronounce some of them. Bengali. Let's see here. What other strange languages did I see? This one. There's Hindi, Kannada, Latvian, Mongolian, Persian. Of course, I've heard of Persian, but the handwriting here is very strange to me. Just some amazing languages that Linux supports just by default, right out of the box. Tagalog. Simply amazing. Of course, we're going to take the default language up here of the last language, which is going to be English, because that's all we've logged in with before. So I'm just going to say cancel. The next thing you can do here is you can change your session. Now sessions are, by default, really you only have the choice of GNOME or a terminal. GNOME is the desktop, the graphical desktop manager, so it's like this windowing system. It's all the different windows and how the windows function. That's what GNOME is. You can replace GNOME with other desktop managers. There's another popular one called KDE. You have to actually install that on the system, but it does come with the Fedora CDs. It's not something you have to go out and download. But by default, GNOME is the only desktop manager that comes installed. Down here you see Failsafe GNOME and Failsafe Terminal. The failsafes are, of course, if you're having problems with Linux. Say somehow you change the resolution on your screen to a resolution that your monitor or video card don't support. Something weird like that, where you might need to use failsafe mode. Failsafe terminal would be just a command line prompt so that you could go in and you could edit text files and hopefully fix your problem. We're just going to take the default here, which is the last session. So I'm going to click cancel. Another thing you can do is you can restart or shut down the computer. That is, of course, if you have logged in. So I'm going to log in as root. And press enter. Goes through here, it loads the window manager, which of course is GNOME. And we're logged in. So some interesting things I want to go through here just on the Windows desktop or the windowing desktop, excuse me, and show you how it works. This is the new Fedora, little logo here you see over here, the Fedora logo. That represents Core 5. It's their new logo. So I'm just going to start up here with the menus and go through all the different menus. So first off, there's Applications, drop down menu here. And I'm going to go through the different submenus and just talk about these different applications. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, as we'll come back and we'll go into these applications later. But for now, I just want to go through here and show you all the different applications and give you a little introduction to each one. So under Accessories, there's the Archive Manager. Archives are like zips. If you're familiar with zips in Windows, Unix or Linux has the same functionality using archives. So it's an archive, it's a compressed compilation of files. So Archive Manager is a graphical way to zip and unzip, or archive and unarchive files. And Linux has its own archive or zip format. It doesn't usually use zip. They have other versions called like GNU Zip and just a few other different archiving programs. Next one, of course, is Calculator. That's easy, just like the Windows calculator. There's the Character Map to insert special characters into documents. There's the Dictionary. You can look up words in an online dictionary. You can take screenshots of your desktop. The Terminal window. This brings you to the Linux command line. We're going to be using that heavily. So let me click on it and just show you what it looks like. So there you go. You're at the Linux command prompt. Right here you can type commands and tell Linux exactly what you want it to do. The trick is knowing the right commands, of course. So I'm going to close that out, and we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. Next off is the text editor. This is just like Notepad in Windows. Allows you to edit text files. Of course, there's a lot of games that are installed by default. I'm not going to go into those. Graphics, there's a thumb image viewer, and then there's the GIMP. The GIMP is a editing program, editing images or photographs. Here under the Internet folder, there are contacts, email, your web browser, which is like Internet Explorer, but this is Firefox. Of course, Internet Explorer doesn't run on Linux, but Firefox is a great web browser. There's Internet Messenger, so you can send instant messages. And then there's IP telephony and voice over IP and video conferencing. This is a new application that you can use to talk to people over the Internet. Under Office, this is OpenOffice, is what this really is. This is the calendar program, presentation. This is like Microsoft PowerPoint. It's called Impress, by the way, is the name of the application. There's Project Management. This is like Microsoft Project. There's a spreadsheet, which is called Calc. So this is like Excel. There's a task program using Evolution. Evolution is a groupware. It's sort of like Microsoft Outlook. And then there's Word Processor. The word processor is called Writer. So these are all part of the OpenOffice Office Automation Suite. There's sound and video. So you have a CD player. You have Helix, which is an open source media player. You have Movie Player. You have Rhythmbox, which plays and organizes your music collection. And you have SoundJuicer CD Extractor. This rips songs off of CDs into like MP3 format. Here's System Tools. Here's File Manager. This is like Windows Explorer. Allows you to browse the file system. And then here's Software Updater. This is a version of a program called Yum, which is a software updating program. This is new in Fedora Core 5. So with this, you can go in and automatically update your Linux applications. This is something you had to install in Fedora Core 4, but it's really handy. It's really useful because there's so many applications in Linux, and there's so many dependencies. And so like one application, to update it, you might have to update 3 other applications. And doing this at the command line used to be very tedious. Well, Yum makes it much, much easier. And that's why they started including this in Fedora Core 5. Then you can add and remove software. So this is installing software that you have already on the Fedora Core CD is what you do with this. So for instance, when we installed Linux, we didn't choose to install every application. We didn't install a web server. We didn't install a mail server, database server like MySQL. There's a ton of applications that we didn't install, and that's what you can go in here and do, is install those applications. If we go up to Places, in Places here's your home folder, that's your home directory, and the name of the file manager by inside Linux, I want to point out, is called Nautilus. Nautilus is the name of the file manager. So if I click on this, this is Nautilus. Even though it doesn't say Nautilus on the top, Nautilus is the Linux version of Windows File Explorer. So it allows you to, scroll through different folders and, look at the files, create new files, rename files, whatever it is you want to do. Copy and paste. So that's what Nautilus is. Let's go back to Places. Here's Desktop. Just shows you your desktop folder. So this folder out here, this desktop, the files in it are actually in a folder, a real folder. And it's the same way in Windows. Windows works the same way. Your desktop is a real folder with files in it. So let's close that. If I go back to Places, here's Computer. View your computer storage. If I click on that, that's the same thing as what's over here on the desktop. So it shows me my floppy drive, my CD, DVD drive, my file system. This is really my hard drive is what that is. And then the network. So this is like going to My Computer in Windows. Same thing. Same thing as My Computer in Windows. So here's CD DVD Creator, so you can create CDs. Here's the CD-ROM disk that's in the drive. Here's network servers that are available on the network. And then connect to server. And then finally search for data on your desktop. So that's what Places is. And then if you have recent documents that you've opened, they would be shown here in the recent documents. So next up, let's talk about the System option up here. So underneath System, there's a lot to talk about. Inside System, we have the Preferences folder. And inside Preferences, there's a lot of preferences. Linux is a very configurable operating system. It's probably the most configurable operating system I have ever seen. When you compare it to Windows, I kid you not, it's 100 times more configurable than Windows. Think of anything on the screen, any application, any functionality, really you can change it in Linux. Now you might have to be a pretty smart, savvy user, maybe even a developer who's willing to get in and edit very technical configuration files or maybe write a little program, but you can change it. And just even a regular user who's not any kind of developer or power user can go in here and just change a ton of different options. So let's go through and look at all these things you can change. First off, I'm just going to go from the top to the bottom. There's more preferences here. So this is kind of the overflow. This is modify your CD database server preferences. Change your default printer. Select multimedia streaming applications. Palm OS devices. You can use Palm PDAs with Linux. No problem. Power management. If you were running this on a laptop, of course, that would be more important. Preferred applications. These are like default applications for file extensions. So if I go to open a .txt file, what application is going to bring up that file? And then here's sessions. Configure the different sessions. We talked about that when we were logging in. Different options for sessions. About Me is where you set your personal information. There's the desktop background. Let's click on that and let's just look at the different background options. So this is wallpaper. Just like in Windows, this background back here is a wallpaper. So if I go through here and I select one of these others, let's try out the blue swirl. Let's see what that looks like. Notice it changes very quickly. Works very well. Here's blue type. It's pretty cool. Earth from space. Ellipses. So a lot of different backgrounds that come with Linux, and of course you can download others. pretty neat background. So you can add wallpaper here if you have some files you've downloaded as backgrounds. You can choose to fill the screen or not, tile it. You can have a solid desktop with a certain color. Let's see what that looks like. We don't want white. Let's have some kind of blue. There we go. There, that's better. So you see how this works. I'm just going to go back and put it on the default right here, the Fedora background. So let's go look at some more preferences. So we looked at desktop background, file management preferences. If I go in here, I can tell it how I want folders and files to be viewed when I go use Nautilus and browse folders and files on the computer. So I say maybe I want icons or I want a list. Let's change it to list and say close. Then I'm going to open my computer, and there you go. You got a list. So you just changed your preferences that easy. Let's go back. Let's put it back to how it was. Change it back to icons. You can arrange by size, name, whatever it is you want to do. Behavior over here. Executable text files, empty the trash, display, icon captions, the date format, columns, the information that you want in columns, preview, lots of different options for file management. There's fonts, there's your keyboard shortcuts. Let's take a look at that. So, let's take a look at some of these that we might use. Okay, Alt Print Screen. Take a screenshot of a window is Alt Print Screen. So that's just like in Windows. And take a screenshot of a whole screen is Print or Print Screen. So it's same shortcuts as in Windows. We can assign other shortcuts for other things. Maximize a window is Alt F10. Close a window is Alt F4. I'm going to try that right now. I'm going to hold down Alt and hit F4. There you go. We just closed a window. And that's the same keyboard shortcut as in Windows. So, a lot of the keyboard shortcuts you might be familiar with from Windows are going to work fine on Linux. And you can go in and define your own keyboard shortcuts. So that's pretty neat. Let's look at menus and toolbars. Show icons and menus. Here's new, open, save. So that's what that does. It doesn't have a lot of options here, but that's where you configure menus and toolbars. What else do we have? Mouse, control your double-click speed or your arrow movement speed. Network proxy, you can configure a proxy server. Personal file sharing. Remote desktop access. Let's take a look at that. Here's sharing. Allow other users to view your desktop. And then what happens when a user tries to view your desktop. So that's using a Linux desktop sharing application. Removable drives and media. Screen resolution. Let's take a look at that. So here's where we would change our screen resolution. And because of my graphics card limitation, I only have 800 by 600 and 640 by 480. But on your PC, you may have many other resolutions. So this is where you would go in and change that resolution, change your refresh rate. I'm going to click close there. What else do we have? Searching and indexing, sound, your theme. Let's take a look at themes. So by default, it's on attractive usability, but we can change it to one of these other themes. Let's change it to something that would really be noticeable. Whoa, how about that? Pretty fancy. Large print. Mist. Simple. All different sorts of themes for Linux. Of course, you can install and you can download more themes. So I'm going to put it back here on Clear Looks, the default, and we'll say close. What else can we do? Volume control and Windows. Set your Windows preferences. Let's take a look at that. Select a window when the mouse moves over them. You can do that. Title bar action. If you double click a title bar, what happens? Well, by default it maximizes that title bar. So if I open this and I double click on this title bar, it maximizes it. If I double click again, it minimizes it. Or, I'm sorry, not minimizes it, but restores it back to its original size. Movement key. To move a window, press and hold this key and grab the window, Alt. So there's different window preferences there. So I just wanted to go through here and review all the different preferences that you have inside Linux. So we've done that. Now let's go into the administration folder here. So here in the administration folder is where the administrator or the root user in Linux would spend a lot of time administering the server. As a regular user, you probably wouldn't go in here and be doing anything. But as a root user, here's where you configure the authentication, date and time, display, keyboard, language, logical volume management. This is where you partition the disk drives, the login screen, the network settings, printers that are on this computer, the root password, the firewall, what services are running on the computer, what services start automatically when the computer starts, sound card, viewing the system log, the system monitor, checking performance, what processes are running, and then of course creating new users and groups on the server. So we'll be spending a lot of time in this area in future videos. Right now I just wanted you to see what it is and where it's located. Then there's help. This is help with GNOME, the desktop management, about GNOME, about Fedora. That just takes you to their website. Here you can lock the screen, puts up like a screensaver. You can log out, of course, and then you can shut down the server. So now let's look at some little icons that are up here on the toolbar. And by the way, they call this a panel. You know, in Windows it's a toolbar, a taskbar, but in Linux this is called a panel here. So this tan bar up here with the icons, this is a panel. So on the panel by default, and you can change it of course, is your web browser, which is Fedora. Let's open Fedora. Takes a second to start up the web browser. Notice down here it says starting web browser. And this brought up a local file here. Let's click on the latest release notes. So this is from the internet, fedora.redhat.com. Here's the Fedora 5 latest release notes. I'm going to click on English. And there's the latest release notes on the web. So we know our Fedora web browser is working fine. Let's close that out. The next icon here is email. Send email and manage your schedule. So this would be like Microsoft Outlook or Outlook Express. There's your word processor. It's called Writer. Let's click on that and open it up. It's a fully functioning word processor. It's very similar to Microsoft Word. It says down here starting word processor, and you see the little lines going around the pointer. Take just a second. So like I said, it's part of OpenOffice. So here's the OpenOffice Writer. Notice it looks very much like Microsoft Word. You know, fully functioning, all sorts of fonts and bold, underline, tables, spell checker, pictures, insert hyperlinks, save as, export to PDF. You can do all sorts of things here. File type. You can change the file type to a Microsoft Word document. We're going to be spending a lot of time in OpenOffice in one of the future videos. So I just wanted you to see that it's here and what it does. I'm going to close that out for now, and we'll say discard our OpenOffice document. Next up is presentation manager or editor called Impress. Let's open Impress and just take a quick look at it. So we can create a new presentation. Let's create one from a template. That looks like a good template. So it created us 3 slides here. Presentation title, section title, and then slides. Notice that it looks very much like Microsoft PowerPoint. You can have handouts. Your slide sorter. Very feature-rich presentation program called Impress. So I'm going to close that out and we'll discard our presentation there. Next up, let's look at Calc. So this is a lot like Microsoft Excel. There you go. We just created a total of 1 plus 2 is 3. So if I change this to 2, whoops, change that to 2, notice the total changed to 4. So, that's a very simple demonstration, but just a sample of what a spreadsheet can do. And Calc is a very able spreadsheet program. It has all sorts of higher-end functions, and it can even talk to databases and so on and so forth. So let's close that out. So if I right-click up here on this panel, I can add to panel, so I could add a new icon there if I wanted to, next to the Calc icon. Let's look at the properties of this panel. The orientation is top. I could change it to be on the right. Notice my applications over there. That's a little confusing. I could change it to be on the bottom, so it's down there. I can change the size of it. Let's change it to 8. No, 23 is the smallest. We can make it bigger though. And we can put it back on the top. We can auto hide it. So if I do auto hide and close, notice how it disappears, and if I go up here, it comes back. Let's turn off auto hide. There's a background, so this panel here can have a background. You could have an image as a background or a solid color. So there's the solid color of our panel. We're able to change that. I'm going to go ahead and try to put it back to none. So just an example of what a panel is. You can add a new panel. You can add a new panel, for instance, over here, and you could put your own icons on this panel. Let's try that. Let's add to panel. And let's put the clock over there. And let's put the command line. Or mini commander, I'm sorry. Let's see what else can we put over there. How about stock ticker? So we put some different icons over here. For instance, the clock. It's kind of strange that it's sideways like that, but it's there. And our other applications, the stock ticker, and the mini commander to scroll through audio files. So that's what the panel does. Let's go ahead and delete this panel. And then let's go on to the rest of the desktop here. Something else I want to show you is these different screens down here. Notice there's 4 boxes. Right now this box is highlighted. this represents this screen. So say I open up Fedora. Notice down here in this screen in just a second it's going to show you a little mini version of Fedora in that little window. So it shows you that this screen is open, that little box. And notice if I resize it, it resizes it down here in this window. So that little box there represents Fedora, and it represents this entire screen. Now if I click on the second box here, notice it blanks out. And it highlights this box down here. So if I go in and I open up, let's just open up something simple like calculator. Okay, there's our calculator. Notice the little calculator down here that's on this window. If I click over here to Fedora, or the other window here, it shows me Fedora. So what I can do is I can click back and forth, and it's like having almost like 4 different monitors. And down here you have little images that represent basically what's on that monitor. So if I click on the fourth one, I can go in and I can open, let's open a text editor. There's my text editor, and I could make it smaller and position it down here. And notice how it changed down there. So I can very quickly, with this little monitor manager almost, click between the different screens that are running on this computer. So it's a very powerful way to have multiple things open and very quickly change back and forth between them. So that's what the different screen function does down here. Now, another important thing, of course, is the trash. Right now there's no items in the trash, but this is just like your recycle bin in Windows. So if I click on that, it's going to bring up what's in the trash. I could, put something in there, and then we can empty the trash, and of course it's gone away. So here's our other panel down here, and then here is the button that you click to hide all windows and show the desktop. So let me open up Calculator, and if I click this button down here, it immediately hides Calculator and minimizes it. If I click the button again, it shows everything that was on the desktop before. So this same button exists in Windows, and it's a very cool feature. So I'm going to close that out. Here, of course, I already showed you we have the computer. Here's the CD-ROM disk that's in the drive, trash can, and then this is root's home directory. So this is like my documents for the root user. So every user in Linux has its own home directory, just like every user in Windows has their own home directory. In Windows you have My Documents. Well, this is called root's home. And if I was logged on here as David, it'd say David's home. So that's my home directory. So I can put my, calc documents, my Impress presentations, and my writer documents all in this folder or this directory, and they're available at the click of a button right there at root's home. Alright, next up, we want to talk about the command line shell versus the GUI interface. So I think you have a good feel for the GUI interface. You can see how you can browse through files by going to My Computer. You can go to the file system here. These are the different folders. You can go through here and find different files and do very similar things that you would do at a command line interface. It's the same way in Microsoft Windows where you have a command prompt, and if you're familiar with the command line language, you can manipulate files, open programs, make changes, and then of course you can do the same thing in the graphical interface. Linux is no different. So this is the graphical interface. If I go to Applications and go to, Terminal right here under Accessories, I have my terminal window. So let's compare the two. Up here is a folder called etc or etc. Down here I'm at a command prompt. So if I want to go to the same folder up here, I can. And I'm going to talk about these different command line utilities here in just a second. But if you'll just hang on for just a second, let me show you that these two match up. These two are the same. Alright, I know there's a lot of different files in here, a lot of different things showing up. But let's look at the first folder right here called ACPI. Here it is here, ACPI. And notice that it's in blue. All the folders are in blue in the command line interface down here. So the next one is Alchemist. Well, here's Alchemist right here. Notice it's in blue. These other files that are in black, those are just regular text files. So just a comparison of browsing files on the graphical interface versus browsing files in the text interface. And I'm going to show you all about how to use this text-based interface. By the time we're done, you should be very comfortable using the text-based or command line interface. So with that, let's explore a little bit more with the command line interface. So first off, let me just close this and let's start over. Let me show you how the terminal window works. So I went to Applications, then to Accessories, then over to Terminal. So I'll click on Terminal, and what I'm given here is a command line prompt. Now what's important about the command line prompt is right here it shows the username. That's the root user, the administrative user. It also shows it up here, root. And it says at localhost. Localhost is this machine. And it's called localhost because right now it doesn't have a name. We didn't give it a name when we did the installation, so it's just called localhost. Then this tells me, the pound sign here, tells me that I'm the root user, I'm the super user. If I weren't a super user, I wouldn't have a pound sign here, I'd have a dollar sign. So just by looking at this prompt, I can tell that I'm the all-powerful super user. The commands, a lot of the commands are the same as DOS, but a lot of them aren't. So we have a lot of commands to learn. One of the commands that is the same as DOS is CD, or change directory. Change directory moves you from one folder to another folder. Now, what's different in Linux is the slashes, or the names of the folders, or what separates the folders, I should say. So in DOS, CD backslash would take you to the root of your drive. In Linux, CD forward slash will take you to the root of your drive. So just something that's a little bit confusing. Some people, that trips them up. But a forward slash represents the root of the drive, and it also separates folders. So if I said /etc/ftpd like that, that forward slash is representing the separation between those two different directories. So I'm just going to type CD backslash right now and press enter. And notice what happened to my prompt. Over here, this tilde, which represented my home directory, changed to a forward slash, which represents the root of the file system. Alright, strangely enough, there is a dir command in Linux. Although it's not really supposed to be there, the Linux command to show files in a directory is ls, which is list files. Let's type that in lowercase, ls. List files, if I press enter right here, it shows me all the files in the root directory. ls has options like ls-l. ls-l gives me a long listing of the files. So the long listing shows that these are a directory. That's what the D is right there. Then it shows the permissions for user, for group, it's the second area here, and then for other, or everyone else. You can see that the owner of this file is root, and it belongs to the group called root. It was created at this date and time. So you get a lot more information with that, and we'll be going more into these permissions later in this video series. So we talked about how ls-l gives you the long format listing. So how do you see other options for the ls command? Well, you use the man command, or manual. Man page is what I think of it as, manual page, and you type the command after that, so man space ls. So this tells me that ls lists directory contents, and then it starts going into the different options here. At the bottom, I'm given this little colon sign, so or colon prompt. So this is actually an Emacs editor prompt. We'll go into Emacs later, but to scroll through this, I can either use the enter key, and I can scroll one line at a time like that, or I can use the space bar, and I can scroll one page at a time. And when I'm done reading, I can just hit Q for quit, and it takes me back exactly where I was before. So if we type the pwd command, it tells us that we're in the / directory, or the root directory. This is the root of all directories in a Linux server. So pwd stands for print working directory. If I type cd just by itself and press enter, notice it takes me back to my home directory. That's the tilde right there, represents my home directory. If I type pwd here, shows that I'm in /root. Now /root again is the root user's home directory, and don't confuse that with the / directory, which is also called root, because it's the root of all the folders and file systems in Linux. So /root is the user's home directory, and just root or / is the root of all the directory trees. So with cd, you can do just like you can in DOS. You can type cd space .. It'll take you back one directory. If I type pwd, I went back one directory, or up the directory tree. Let's see here. If we type ps for process list, it shows us what processes are running on or under this user. So the only thing running under this user is a program called bash, and then the ps command that we just ran. Now bash is actually a shell. Bash is this shell prompt that I'm using right here. I'm in a shell called bash. That's what I'm executing these commands in. There's a lot of different shells in Linux. So just like we have a different desktop windowing manager we can choose besides GNOME. GNOME is this graphical desktop manager back here, but I can choose other graphical desktop managers in Linux. It's the same way with your prompt over here. Right now I'm in bash. I can type CSH, and it'll take me to the C shell. If I type PS, it shows that I'm running bash, then the C shell. Underneath that, then the PS command. If I type exit, I exited the C shell. I type PS, and I'm back where I was. There's other shells, like the Korn shell, or KSH. So I'll type KSH, and it put me in a Korn shell prompt. If I type man space KSH, it tells me about the Korn shell. It's a programming language, and it's a shell interface. It has its own scripting language, and that's why they call it a programming language, because you can write very complex scripts in the Korn shell. It has its own keyboard shortcuts and other things like that, own environmental variables. All these different shells do. So I'll type exit, and I'm back at my bash prompt. Speaking of processes, let's do a ps-f. That gives a full listing. So what I can see here is I ran the ps-f command. Its PID, here's the PID column, its PID number is this right here, 15254. So there's a unique process ID is what this is. It's a unique number that identifies this process or this program that's running on the system. The parent PID, or the owner of this PID that spawned this PID, is this number here, 14811. And if I notice up at the line before that, 14811 is actually the bash shell. So bash spawned this ps-f when we typed it. So what you can do is type ksh ps-f, and see, here's the ps-f. its parent PID is KSH, and the parent PID of KSH is bash. So you can go forward and backward through these different shells to execute different commands and get access to different features. Let's talk about starting programs and keyboard shortcuts at the same time. So if I type gcal, let's say I want to type a command and I don't know the rest of the command. So if I type gcal and I press tab, it'll automatically complete that command for me. So you don't always have to memorize every single command, on a Linux server. So the gcalc tool is the graphical calculator. So I'm going to press enter, and it starts the calculator back here in the background. Notice what happened down here to my prompt. I'm locked up. I can't do anything else. That's because I started the gcalc tool in the foreground. The foreground just means it's running in this shell, and nothing else can be executed until this process is ended. So if I close it out here, notice I'm back to where I was before, and I can do things in my shell. One thing I can do is up arrow. Up arrow will repeat the last command. So this is like a command history. So if I keep hitting up arrow, it shows me all the different commands that I've run. If I hit down arrow, I scroll back down through these. Say I want to repeat the ps-f command, but I want to add an A to it. So I can very quickly execute some of these other commands that I did before just by scrolling through here. There's pwd. So I can type ls, then I can type ls-l, ls-a, ls-lai. So I can very quickly add, different options or edit the command that I typed before. So this also works if you, mistakenly type something. I can up arrow and say ls. See how that works? So let's go back to our gcalc tool command, and let me show you a little trick here. If you put an ampersand at the end of it, that means to put it in the background. So if I hit enter there, it starts up just as it did before, but it tells me the PID number of the gcalc tool, and it's running in the background. So I have access to this shell, and I can do whatever I want down here still. If I type ps-f, you can see the gcalc tool's running. The parent PID is bash, but yet I can still run commands like the ps command. If I close this out, nothing really happens down here until I hit enter, and it tells me that that program completed successfully with done. So we talked about launching programs, shell shortcuts. Let's talk about the directory structure briefly. If I type cd, it takes me to my home directory. cd / takes me to the root of all directories. So ls-l here shows me all these different directories. Now, the Linux directory structure can be confusing and a bit overwhelming. Let's just go through some of the directories and their basic features. Bin is where programs are stored. If I go into cd --bin, I type ls, these are all programs. So some of the commands we've been using are stored in here. For instance, there's the ls command right there. Here's ping. Here's tar is to archive files. Here's vi, this is an editor. Here's the Bourne shell, this is another type of shell. The date command. Lots of important commands are stored here in the bin directory. Let's go back one directory, and then there's the boot directory. The boot is where the kernel's stored. So this is the Linux kernel right here. This is what boots up the operating system. Notice there's also some grub information in here. There's the dev directory. Every device, every file, every folder in Linux is a file. So if you have a program, it's a file. If you have a device like a printer, it's a file. If you have a mail queue, it's a file. A tape drive is a file. A folder is a file. Everything is represented by a file in Linux. So if I go in here to dev and I did an ls-l, all these devices in here are system devices. So here's LP0. This is the line printer, main line printer in 0. Loopback, here's the network loopback interface. Your disk drive will be found in here. Here's your floppy drive. This is FD0, floppy drive 0. Here's CD-ROM, audio, your audio card, DVD. Everything in Linux is represented by a file. So obviously users can't go in here and just delete devices. It's protected from that. But that's what the dev directory is. And it's dynamically created when the system boots up. Every time the system boots, the dev directory is created. There's the etc directory, or etc. here. This is where configuration files are stored. That's all it is configuration files for the system and also for lots of different programs. Here's home. This is the home directory for users. So here's the user we created, Jim, and this is his home directory. Notice it's a D. That's where Jim's my documents, if you will, that's where Jim's documents and personal configuration files are stored. There's lib. This is where libraries are stored. Lost and found. This is where pieces of files are put after a check disk if there's some sort of disk problem. Media. This is where things like CD-ROMs and DVDs are mounted on. Miscellaneous is just miscellaneous. Mount is another mount point for CD-ROMs and DVDs. Opt is optional programs. Usually this is third-party programs. Proc is a special system directory. Root is the home directory for the root user. SBIN is where other programs are stored. Whoops. CD/SBIN. So here in SBIN there's administrative programs. These are all programs that a normal user wouldn't be running, not like the ls command, but these are administrative programs like makefs or make file system. Let's see what else we have in here. IP tables. This is the Linux firewall. Kill all. I don't know if you saw that. Here it is. Kill all. You know, you don't want a normal user to be running kill all. Init. This is what spawns lots of programs on the Linux system. ifconfig shows you the status of your interface. There's grub, the bootloader, fdisk, dhcp, lots of different administrative programs in here. So let's go back to the root directory. And then we have SE Linux. This is a directory for the new Security Enhanced Linux. There's SRV, sys, temporary, user/USR, and this is not for users. /USR is where lots of important system files are stored. User bin is where some more programs are. Lots of programs like Yum. This is the package updater program. There's zip. Let's see what else we have in here. Lots of X programs. Anything that starts with an X is usually a graphical program. So like your graphical calculator or your graphical configuration, graphical kill. All the graphical programs start with X because this is based on X Windows. So lots of different administrative programs in bin. Then there's var. Var is for variable files, files that grow in length. So usually you'll find logs in there, or also if this is a mail server, you might find the mail in there. But usually you're looking at log files in the var or variable file system. So I just wanted you to get a little overview of the directory tree And of course you can navigate this whole directory tree not just in the command line interface, but also using the GUI file manager. You can use wildcards in Linux. So if I type ls asterisk net, whoops, we didn't get it. That's because all these are directories and not files. So let's go back to our directory, our home directory, and type ls-l. And so here's some files in here. So let's type ls and anything that starts with B, EE, and I'll put an asterisk there. So that just shows me this WMA file called Beethoven Symphony No. 9. And that's because that started with BEE. That was the only thing that started with BEE. Let's see anything that has BLU in it. So ls asterisk BLU asterisk shows me that this file here has blue in it, or BLU. So you can see how the asterisk wildcard works there. And there's other wildcards in Linux. You can represent a single character. You can do a range of letters or range of numbers. We'll get into more of that later. Right now I just wanted you to see the most used wildcard in Linux, which is the asterisk. Let's do a little exercise on moving files. First let me show you how to do it in the graphical interface. If I close this out, I'm going to go to My Computer, go into File System, and let's go into root's home directory, which is /root. You see the little home there next to it. So here's a file called install.log. Just like in Windows, I can right click on this. I can say copy it. I can right click over here in the white area and say paste. And it says it made an install.log, but it's a copy. So I can right click on that and I can rename it, and I can call it test, let's say. So there it is, test.log. That's what we just created. If I right click on it again, I can cut. I can go to my desktop over here and I can paste it, and I just put it on the desktop. I can right click on it again and I can say move to trash. Same thing as deleting it. And notice the trash has a file in it over here now, and the file's gone. So if I right click on the trash, I can say empty trash. It says empty all the items from the trash. Yes, empty the trash, and the file's gone. So you can see how easy it is in the graphical environment, just like Microsoft Windows. So let me close that out. Let's close these out. Well, let's go back and open our terminal window. I'm going to go to Applications, Terminal. Okay, so I'm in my home directory already, so I can type ls. There's the files in my home directory. And here's that install.log file. So say I want to do the exact same thing I did in the graphical interface, do it here in the command line interface. So I can copy install.log to test.log. So CP in Linux is copy. Copy is CP. There's no copy command, but it's CP. And it's source and destination. So if I hit enter, it copied the file. Let me type ls, and you can see now we have a test.log file. So then I renamed it. Let's rename it. Now, the rename in Linux is move, or MV. So really what you're doing, it's confusing to use the move command to actually rename something, because you're thinking, I'm not moving that file. But you're just moving it from one file name to another file name. So if I say mv or move test.log, I can call it test-new.log. Press enter. Now type ls, and there's our test-new.log, and the test.log file is gone. So I renamed it. Of course, you can also use the move command, or mv, to move files from one directory to another file, to another directory, or from one disk to another disk. Now let's delete. Delete in Linux is rm, or remove. So I'll rm test-new.log. And it says, are you sure you want to remove the regular file test-new.log? Say yes, and it's gone. So all these different commands have options. If you type man mv, you can learn all the options for move. You type man rm for remove, you can learn all the options for remove. Every command you do has options. Linux is full of options and features for different programs. So with that, let's go back and look at all that we've learned in this video on Linux. So in this video, we basically had a tour of how Linux works. We went all through the Linux operating system and just sort of explored all the different features and options. We learned how to log in, how to log out. We learned the task manager in Linux, which is really the PS command. We learned about panels. Those are like little task bars on the tops and the bottom or the sides of the screen. We learned how to add icons to those, how to remove icons. We learned about screens, the 4 little boxes down on the bottom right hand corner, and how with just one monitor you can essentially have like 4 different monitors, because Linux offers this feature of screens where you have 4 different screens and you can quickly change between those different screens and run different things on every screen. We learned about common GUI applications like Calculator and etc., etc. We went through all the different application options and just sort of explored the array of applications that Linux has to offer. We learned about the command line shell versus the GUI interface. The GUI interface, of course, is much easier for users who aren't used to the Linux command line shell. The command line shell can be a bit intimidating, but once you learn how to use things like up arrow to get your history, you learn about tab for auto command completion, and feel a little bit more comfortable with some of the commands and the directory structure, you'll get the hang of it and it won't be a problem at all. We learned how to start new shells. We went forward and backwards with different shells. We learned about the types of shells, the C shell, Korn shell, Bourne shell, and the Bash shell. We learned how to launch programs and also put programs in the background so it doesn't take up the shell that we're in and make that shell unusable until the program's done that we launched. We learned some shell shortcuts. We learned just the basics of the directory structure, how the slash directory is the root of the entire Linux directory tree, and that slash directory is also called root. And that's not to be confused with the slash root directory, which is the home directory for the root user. We learned the basics of directory navigation using CD for change directory, LS for list files, and PWD for print working directory. We learned about wildcards, the primary wildcard being the asterisk. We learned how to copy, move, rename, and delete files. Copying files in Linux, you use the CP command. Moving, you use the MV command. Renaming, you use the MV command again. And deleting, you use the RM command for remove file. We learned how to explore files in the GUI file manager called Nautilus, as well as the command line interface, which would be the Bash shell. We learned how to change our resolution and our colors in Linux using the graphical tools. So in this video we had a wide tour of the Linux operating system. I hope you learned a lot and you feel a little bit more comfortable with the Linux interface. This is the end of video number 4. Thank you very much.